our host. I'd like to now go and look at the minutes from the August meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes as presented? Seeing none, I entertain a motion to adopt those minutes.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? And carries unanimous. I did overlook one thing. I'd like members at the table here to introduce themselves. Representing Cherry, this is your last meeting. I'll let you start, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representing Cherry, Bob Cherry from Greenfield, Indiana, District 53. I represent most of Hancock County and the southern part of Madison County.
Eric Gonzalez, House Democrat, Fiscal Analyst. Representative Gregory Porter, House District 96, North Central part of Indianapolis.
Joe Habig, Acting State Budget Director.
Ben Tooley, Fiscal Analyst for the House Republicans.
Jeff Thompson, House District 28, parts of Hendricks, Boone, and Montgomery counties.
Chris Garton, Senate District 45. Welcome to Southeast Indiana, and welcome to my alma mater, Indiana University Southeast.
Krista Ricci, Fiscal Analyst for the Senate Republican Caucus.
David Nizgotsky, Senate District 10, South Bend, and portions of St. Joseph County.
Hope Tribble, Director of Fiscal Policy for Senate Democratic Caucus.
Jordan Lett, Fiscal Analyst for the Senate Republican Caucus.
Lisa Ackelbert, Deputy Budget Director.
Heath Holloway, Legislative Services Agency.
Thank you. We have an agenda that has been, a proposed agenda that's been distributed. And at this point, are there any amendments to that agenda? Seeing none, the chair places the agenda on the table for discussion. And we'll now move to agency projects. And I believe first we have the Adjutant General's office. They come forward, please. Present. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. This is strange. This is my alma mater as well. Secondary education major years ago. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members, and staff. I'm Colonel Chris Mavis, representing Major General Dale Lyles for the Indiana National Guard and the Adjutant General's office. Just a quick update on your Indiana National Guard. We're extremely busy right now with about 10% of the force engaged in operations around the world, so about 1,000 soldiers. We've got 600 soldiers currently training at Fort Cavazos, Texas, in preparation for deployment to Kuwait here in the next month. We have 300 soldiers who initially responded to Hurricane Milton, with one company of about 100 soldiers remaining in Florida right now. And then we recently deployed 12 airmen who responded to Hurricane Helene in North Carolina. I'm here today to ask for the release of funding for 3 capital projects. The first project is a request for an approval of $616,234 for Kessler Moore Armory roof replacement located in Indianapolis. We are requesting an additional $140,066 in state funding to replace the roof at the Kessler Moore Armory. Cost overruns were a result of an unforeseen condition. The project is supported 75% by federal dollars. When the roof was designed and cored, it was discovered the roof had multiple layers and the ballast materials were not reusable. The replacement will include demolition of the existing roofing system and installation of a 30-year EPDM roof. This armory serves both the 81st Troop Command and the 53rd Civil Support Team. The roof on this armory is 27 years old and it has exceeded its useful life. The roof has multiple leaks and has caused damage to the recently renovated interior of the building. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Continue, please, sir.
Thank you. The next request is for approval of $766,261 for the building management system at the South Bend Readiness Center. The funding will be coming from bid savings of 3 other FY24 projects. This project is supported with 63% federal funding, and with the state portion being $283,516. The building management system at the South Bend Readiness Center serves a building that is approximately 180,000 square feet that serves the 2nd Battalion, 151st Infantry, and subordinate elements and J Company of the 113th BSB. The management system is antiquated and does not integrate with the building management systems in the adjoining buildings. Replacing the current building management system will reduce energy usage and maintenance costs. Are there any questions?
Questions? Continue, please, sir.
Thank you. The next and final request is for approval of $911,237 for emergency repairs to Stout Field, Building 5 in Indianapolis, which is the old tower building on Stout Field. This project is supported with 63% federal funding, with the state portion being $337 and $337,158. This funding is for the Adjutant General's Office State Headquarters, Building 5 at Stout Field. This historic building, built in 1941 and renovated in 2010, houses most state employees, including the comptroller, facilities, purchasing and contracting, including general counsel and other executive level staff. Recently, a water main burst and flooded a generator pit, basement, and sub-basement in building number 5. This caused multiple failures of the HVAC, water treatment, water heating, and electrical systems throughout the building. This project includes fixing the water main, electrical, plumbing, and sump pump issues. Failure to address this issue prevents this building from being used for its intended purpose. Are there any questions on this project?
Questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your service, too.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we have Department of Administration. Come forward, please. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Matt Kent with the Department of Administration. The first project I have is a request for $720,000 to upgrade the HVAC control systems for the Indiana State House. The current control system was installed in 2006 and is well past its useful life. The components of that 2006 system are being phased out, and therefore replacement parts are becoming difficult to find. The new system will include HVAC software upgrades and wireless control that will integrate into our current building management systems, giving us better oversight on the entire system. This will also allow for better controls of the climate in the State House and should provide for some energy efficiencies. Questions?
Questions? Continue, please.
Next request is funding to complete the upgrade of the State House elevators. As with the HVAC controls project, the components on the current elevator systems are becoming obsolete and difficult to find replacement parts for. This project will completely overhaul the drive machines and controllers that were installed in 1997. The new control system will allow for continuous monitoring of cab speed and notification of any malfunctions or service that might be needed on the elevators. There will also be a dual brake system installed and new hoist cables. We'll be sure to maintain the existing historic nature of the elevator cabs with minimal changes in appearance other than the operating plates and the push buttons. The design work and lead times on the elevators are extremely long, so getting this funding in place will help keep this project moving.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you for presenting. Next, we have, I believe, the Indiana War Memorial Commission. I guess you're all
Still here
that
for
too.
you.
Go right ahead, please.
On behalf of the War Memorial Commission, I'm requesting $2.4 million for window replacement at 3 buildings on their campus. The funds will complete the window replacement at the War Memorial building itself that started in 2021. All those windows there are well past their useful life and are allowing air and water to penetrate the building. Most of these windows are on the ground floor, and some of them add to the historic nature of the building, so we'll be sure to keep those with the replacements. From there, we'll move to the newly renovated Indiana Veterans Center building at 777 North Meridian. Due to the costs of the 2019 renovation, the windows were removed from that original scope, and so this is essentially coming back and finishing that renovation with the windows there. There's over 150 windows in that building. Last of all, we'll go across the plaza to the American Legion building on Pennsylvania Street and replace the 170 plus windows on that building as well. As with the War Memorial building, the window replacements for those two similar buildings will be kept in the historic nature.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Last project I've got is on behalf, again, of the War Memorial Commission. This will upgrade the electrical systems at the War Memorial building itself. The current electrical system is becoming aging, and the components there are beginning to fail and becoming difficult to find replacement parts for. Proposed upgrades will include new switchgear, a transformer, and replacement of the 21 electrical panels in the building. There will also be replacement of old wiring and receptacles, upgrading the system to current day standards.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next, we have Department of Transportation. Floor is yours, sir.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Steve McAvoy, INDOT Statewide Facilities Director. One project on the agenda, we're requesting $1,772,000 to replace HVAC systems at our research facility in West Lafayette. This facility was built in 1966, approximately 20,000 square feet. The main building is currently served by a Mitsubishi VRF system, 2 air-cooled condensing units, and 2 existing air handlers. These units cannot properly maintain the condition of the space and are near failure. These HVAC systems have reached their life expectancy and are in need of replacement. This HVAC project will replace the 2 air-cooled condensing units, upgrade the 2 air handlers, replace the controls on 37 VAV terminal units, and replace the VRF system with a packaged rooftop units and VAV boxes with hot water reheat.
Thank you. Any questions? Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Next, we have Family and Social Services Administration. Come forward, please. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the State Budget Committee. I am Jeff Wedding. I'm the Director of Operations for the Indiana State Psychiatric Hospital Network, operating under the Family and Social Services Administration's Division of Mental Health and Addiction. I'm here today to discuss 2 appropriated projects needed for our state hospitals. The first project we are seeking today is for Evansville State Hospital to install road lighting. The roadways leading to the entrance of the campus at Evansville are currently unlit, and security staff has had to address ongoing safety issues within this area. These unlit areas pose a danger to cars traveling on the roadway, including emergency personnel. This project will involve the installation of concrete bases, light poles, and energy-efficient LED lights. As there is limited electrical supply in the area, this project will also include upgrading those supply lines. Failure to address this issue does leave pedestrians, personnel, visitors, and emergency vehicles at risk. We are seeking the release of $261,200 appropriated for this project, with Evansville State Hospital staff prepared to begin as soon as possible. Happy to answer any questions on that project.
Any questions? Thank you. Continue, please.
The second project we are requesting is to complete the removal of the steam plant at Logansport State Hospital. This steam plant, now 136 years old, was designed when the campus was twice as big as it is now. Central heating of water and steam is no longer cost-effective, repairs have become very costly, and there are continued issues with finding qualified staff to operate the 24/7 steam plant according to state requirements. The solution is that new boilers and energy-efficient hot water heaters will be installed throughout the facility in place of the steam. Failure to address this issue will result in continued expensive staffing and maintenance costs. Logansport physical plant staff have been working closely with the Department of Public Works and Applied Engineering to fully scope out this project and are requesting to begin as soon as possible with cold weather now upon us. These funds will go towards all phases of decommissioning, including any necessary additional design work, abatement, utility work, removal of the outdated steam equipment, and of course the installation of the new boilers and hot water heaters. We are requesting the release of $5,868,940 appropriated for this project for a construction requisition to get underway and work awarded. The team at Richmond is ready to begin working with the Department of Public Works as soon as possible upon release of these funds. Happy to answer any questions on this project.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you for presenting.
Thank you, committee.
Next, we have Department of Natural Resources. Welcome. The floor is yours, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Chris Smith, Deputy Director with the Department of Natural Resources. We've got 3 projects for your consideration this morning. The first is $1,408,000 for the Division of Forestry's Resource Management. The Division of Forestry actively manages over 160,000 acres of forest land, as well as 500 miles of recreational trail. This project includes timber harvesting, forest restoration, and timber stand improvement. That includes prescribed fire and invasive species control. They are all essential to maintaining forest health, resiliency, and a productive forest. The project we're considering today covers approximately 5,000 acres. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Senator Garten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the 500 miles of recreational trails, can you remind me again what the average cost of a trail is?
So these are going to be natural surface trails as opposed to paved trail. Significantly better. Paved trail, it's about $1 million a mile. Natural surface trails, I would have to do some digging and figure out what that's going at, but you know.
So if memory serves me correctly, and this is all archived footage, when DNR came before the Appropriations Committee in the Senate last budget, we had a pretty robust debate about trails, which I support. What I don't support is the fact that a trail mile in the state of Indiana costs us more than it does to pave a mile of I-65. And so I'm hoping you can help me understand that.
Yeah, scalability and production. I mean, I will be happy to provide kind of the breakdown of per mile. We can provide that to the committee. Absolutely.
That'd be great.
I don't have it sitting in front of me, unfortunately.
That'd be great.
But happy to do that as a
Thank you.
follow-up. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Other questions? Can you please?
Yeah, absolutely. Our second project, we're requesting $490,000 to replace the roof on our Northeast Regional Office Complex. The Nero Complex, located in Columbia City, is home to our District 2 law enforcement headquarters. It also houses staff from the Division of Fish and Wildlife, as well as the State Excise Police. The current roof is over 20 years old and has recently started leaking. An inspection determined that replacement is necessary. The building does have a flat roof design and will require the removal of the existing roof layers before installation of the new roof. The project ensures a secure and watertight roof and helps us continue operations at that facility. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Can you please?
Yep, our final project is a renovation of scope and funding modification for the Mixaba Fish Hatchery renovation. The department is requesting additional funding to encumber the bid price for the Mixaba State Fish Hatchery near Walkerton, Indiana. Deferred maintenance funding will be utilized to modernize the hatchery's wastewater treatment facility. The project was originally budgeted for $1.3 million. Bids came in higher than that. So the additional $660,000 in funding will be repurposed from previously allotted deferred maintenance fundings.
Any questions? Thank you for presenting.
Thank you, sir.
Next on the agenda, we have the Indiana State Museum and Historic Sites. If they would come forward, please. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
A little bit shorter than everybody else. Good morning. My name is Kathy Ferry, and I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of the Indiana State Museum and Historic Sites. This morning, we're asking for the $1 million match. We have matched with private funds this $1 million that we're requesting today. These funds will serve different projects at Corydon Capital State Historic Site, the Culbertson Mansion, the Lanier Mansion, the New Harmony State Historic Site, the T.C. Steele State Historic Site, and the Indiana State Museum. These funds will address issues with accessibility, necessary repairs, a new software system, and an upgrade to our website. All structures are on the National Historic Registry and require regular upkeep. Failure to address these issues could result in expensive maintenance costs and accessibility issues for our visitors. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Any questions? Thank you for presenting.
Thank you all.
Next, we have the State Budget Agency, Director Havoc. I think you're the one on the list, aren't you, to present?
Not for this one, Chairman. I believe we have Luke Kenworthy, our Director of
Okay,
federal grant policy and management.
Thank you. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Luke Kenworthy, Director of Federal Grants Policy and Management at State Budget Agency. State Budget Agency requests the release of $3 million appropriated to the agency in order to implement and operate the statewide grants management system. In 2002, OMB and SBA selected eCivis as the statewide grants management system, and in June of 2022, this committee provided for $8.8 million to the project. It was a combination of ARPA funds and from the general fund. We launched the statewide grants management system, one core function, in September of 2023, and this funding will allow us for the ongoing training and implementation of the other core function of the grants management system, which includes the application of federal grants, receipt, financial management, closeout, and then also the solicitation, awarding, and subrecipient monitoring of awards to Hoosiers.
Thank you. Any questions, members of the committee? Thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
Next, we have the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. Forward, please. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Brock Herr. I'm Senior Vice President of Business Development for the IEDC. Today, the IEDC is requesting the release of $3 million from the Rural Cash Performance Grant, or the Deal Closing Fund, for 2 accepted projects, which consist of components of larger incentive packages for each of the deals. These 2 rural projects together represent over $1 billion of committed capital investment and the hiring of at least 1,300 full-time Indiana employees in high-wage positions. The first project the Indiana Economic Development Corporation requests the review of is $2 million in cash performance grants that are reserved for use in rural communities from the Deal Closing Fund to support Project Rainier. Project Rainier is the location of business operations for a developer and manufacturer of advanced communication systems in Daviess County. The project entails $456 million of capital investment and the creation of over 600 high-wage jobs. The comprehensive IDC incentive package totals $18 million, consisting of $9 million in EDGE tax credits, $7 million in redevelopment tax credits, and the $2 million rural cash performance grant.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Garton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brock, thanks for that. Real quick, just looking at that, if I remember, we defined rural counties in that as counties under 50,000, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
And it was 5% of the overall appropriation, which I think gets us to about 25 million.
That's correct.
How much is remaining?
Remaining after these 2 deals will be, and it depends how you look at that with outstanding offers, but anywhere from $17 to $19.5 million remaining.
Any reason why that's still floating around out there?
You know, part of it is, or I should say a large part is driven by, the company site location. We can't force, nor do we necessarily drive companies to one location or the other. They select it based on a number of factors. And many times, workforce and proximity to ecosystem and things like that are driving factors. And so as you get into more of those rural counties, some of those key proximity factors for certain projects just aren't there.
Any feedback? Is any of that due to utility companies not maybe having the infrastructure in those rural communities? Or
I would say infrastructure availability, and that includes roads, water, wastewater, and electric, all of those, absolutely. 100%. And it's not necessarily the inability to get those there. A lot of times it's the timelines and obviously some of the financing components that it's feasible, but the timelines at which these companies need to move to meet certain deadlines just doesn't make it workable.
Sure. Thanks for that, bro. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further questions? Thank you.
The second project the IDC requests a review of is the release of $1 million in cash performance grants, similarly reserved for rural communities from the Deal Closing Fund. This is for IRH Manufacturing. This project is public and accepted. IRH Manufacturing will establish the location of its business operations for the manufacture of renewable energy materials, components, and equipment in Tipton County. And as a quick side note, the facility that FCA has right along 31 that has been vacant for some time is the facility that this company will go into. So a great reuse of that building. This project entails a total capital investment of $580 million, the creation of 700 new high-wage jobs as well, and the comprehensive IDC incentive package totals $25 million, consisting of $24 million in EDGE tax credits and the $1 million rural cash performance grant.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Brock. You've used the word high-wage jobs on numerous occasions. What constitutes a high-wage job?
When we say high-wage jobs, we say that is at or above the national average wage. And I apologize, I don't know off the top of my head, but I believe it's in the $35 an hour range, is what we would say is, quote, high wage. We then also look at county average wages and state average wages. And so when we say high wage, we're typically talking at or above national average wage. When we say at or above state average wage, that's obviously intuitive what that is. And then, of course, the county average wage, too. So 3 different average wage bands that we look at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you for being here and presenting.
Thank you.
Next, I believe we move to university projects. And on my list first, I have Indiana University. Dr. Morrison, the floor is yours, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Budget Committee, Representative Cherry. On behalf of all of my colleagues in higher education, thank you. We talked that I started working in this world just before you got elected, so it's one of the ways I mark time. And it's never lost on us that you're a Purdue Boilermaker. But on behalf of myself, thanks for your support of some IU Hoosiers over the years and some Ball State Cardinals. So appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I have 5 projects for you this morning. I will start with the regional campus deferred maintenance R&R appropriation. This is a cash appropriation released in the second year of the biennium that is for R&R, special R&R projects on all 5 of IU's regional campuses. This is, I believe, the 6th time the General Assembly has appropriated funds in this way for the regional campuses. I can't tell you how important it has been for the upkeep of regional campuses. Just as in the one you're here today at IU Southeast, we utilize those funds for major mechanical systems, for laboratory renovations, for key infrastructure. It gets divided amongst our regional campuses based on the size of their physical plants. The appropriation is just under $9.8 million, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? I just might comment. I've heard by other members of your team how important this is, and for the state's perspective, it's not having long-term debt when we have those untaken care of types of things that you're doing, and I appreciate we're keeping things current. Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you for your support, Mr. Chairman. Item number 2, I will push to the end because I've got a longer presentation on that one, so I'll go to project number 3. Which is on our IU Bloomington campus. This is for the renovation of chemistry teaching labs. This is in the 300,000 square foot chemistry building on the Bloomington campus, the main chemistry building. This is for the renovation of 31,000 square feet of teaching labs to bring them up to mechanical standards that are required in the delivery of science-based education. It'll be $14.6 million funded by campus renovation funds. Happy to answer any questions here.
Thank you. Any questions? Continue, please.
Also on the Bloomington campus, the next project is for cooling capacity and distribution upgrades on the Bloomington campus. We maintain their 14 major chillers on the Bloomington campus, and chilled water or air conditioning is the one thing that nobody has ever asked me to produce less of. And so this is to replace 2 aging chillers that are over the age of 35, and as well, we will purchase 2 additional chillers that will be able to be put into 2 satellite plants, and then we'll upgrade the distribution system so all of the main chiller plant and the 2 satellite plants will be connected to provide us some level of redundancy. $16.4 million and to be funded from campus funds.
Thank you. Questions? Continue, please.
On the Indianapolis campus, project related to the IU School of Medicine, this is for the Van Nuys Medical Science Building. This is for renovation to expand research lab capabilities in that facility, for renovation of existing classrooms and offices into research labs to complement the existing labs that are in that building. This is made possible because of the School of Medicine's instructional services will be now delivered in the new hospital complex on North Capitol in our facility that is about to open there. And so this allows us on the main campus to transform these spaces into research labs. You will probably see me coming forward with other renovation plans for the existing campus in future meetings, but this one is $11 million funded by School of Medicine research funds. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Thank you. Number 2 then, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the last project for you is what is item number 2 on your agenda is for the athletic center to be located on our Indianapolis campus at IU Indianapolis. This project has some history to it, and so I want to take you through some of that. If you can go back in time to the late 70s, early 80s, Indianapolis started to invest in its sports infrastructure, and part of that was the construction of new facilities that were located on then the IUPUI campus. Included in that specifically were the IU Natatorium and Carroll Track and Field. To give you a relationship there, the state built those facilities and then or paid for the building of those facilities, done under the direction of Indiana University, and then IU owned and operated those facilities. Continues today. The IU Natatorium, which actually was renovated several years ago, has been remarkable and is still noted as the fastest pool in the world. And to give you a connection there is that IU, in managing that pool, has been able to attract events and continues to attract events from around the world. You all know that Indianapolis hosted the Olympic trials in swimming this past summer in Lucas Oil Stadium. That would not have been possible without the relationships established and all the events that happened at the IU Natatorium over those years. The architect, figuratively, the architect of that initial investment was Jim Morris, the late Jim Morris. And he did that in the late 70s along with his partner, then Mayor Richard Lugar. And so those investments have really paid off over time. Then as a trustee of Indiana University, Jim brought forth to us about a decade ago saying we need to imagine the next future of the athletic facilities at then IUPUI. And so the General Assembly in 2017 appropriated planning funds to imagine what would be the next generation of facilities there. That planning took place, and one of the recommendations was the addition of a 4,500-seat arena or athletic center to be located on the campus that could serve the region and the local community, just as the natatorium had. That project started to move forward, and then and one of the things that was recommended to us from day one of that planning and from advice from the General Assembly in fiscal leadership is that if we're going to do this, it needs to be more than just a facility for Indiana University. It needs to serve the local community, and it needs to serve for events and to attract events. And so we've been down that path, and I would tell you that President Whitten is a strong supporter of that because we want more people to come to the Indianapolis campus, and if it's through visitors, through events, that is an absolutely good thing. Jim Morris understood the power of athletics and sports and what it could do to bring people together, and so that was the motivation. An unfortunate thing happened along the way. In 2020, COVID hit, and we thought we had missed the opportunity because some of the other things we were working on in conjunction with this facility started to dry up. Jim encouraged us all the way through to keep working on it, and a good thing happened in 2021. The Indianapolis community hosted the entire NCAA basketball tournament. And when that happened, it reinvigorated the need for this because the community recognized that we probably needed one more facility of this size. And so with the support of partners at the Indiana Sports Corporation and the NCAA, we move forward in continuing to try to advance this facility. And in the 2023 session, $89 million were appropriated for an amateur athletic facility and to the state budget agency. This was also a way of recognizing the previous relationship of the natatorium and other facilities that were funded the same way. We have been working on the planning of this facility, 134,000 square feet. It would be located just north of the State Museum, just north of the NCAA complex, immediately adjacent to downtown, just west of Military Park. It'd be 4,500 seats, focused on amateur sports. This is not a facility we're looking at for concerts and other things like that. That's a different marketplace. This is strictly to be used for amateur sports. Of course, yes, for IU Indy athletics, but also all the other events you can imagine that come to the downtown. This is a facility that will attract major events, and it's also one that we see being utilized for lots of high school events. The natatorium is used that way, and we can imagine this facility being used that way for Indianapolis high school activities. Jim Morris was a fierce advocate of this facility right up until his passing a few months ago. He was an advocate for it in its funding, in its planning, and because he knew the value of this in the long term. This process is a long march for those of us in higher education. When we come forward with a capital project that has multiple steps to it, you happen to be really close to the last step in this. And when it was going through its steps in the Commission for Higher Education, I had the opportunity to share with Jim that it was moving forward, and he was absolutely died, and he said, keep going. And unfortunately, he died a couple of weeks later. And so, but this was part of his vision for the sports district, and we at Indiana University are happy to shepherd it through. And so I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Morrison, for that presentation, and particularly the historic perspective of how we are here today. It is, and I worked with Mr. Jim on numerous occasions. It is my humble opinion, sir, that my perspective that the Board of Trustees would consider donning his name upon that facility that we're looking at doing. That athletic center will be a stronghold on the west side of Indianapolis, and within that zip code just west of downtown. And so I will hope that as we continue to move forward with this, that the trustees will put a name on there of James T. Morris because of all the work he's done, not only in Indianapolis, but across this nation and internationally in his works over the years. So just want to put that on record, ladies and gentlemen, and ask if you will be a nice courier back to the Board of Trustees. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for hearing me.
Representative Porter, thank you so much for that recommendation. I'll be happy to carry that back to the Board of Trustees. I know that Chairman Quinn Buckner would be pleased to consider it in terms of your recommendation, and it would be an appropriate step. So thank you, Representative Porter.
Representative Porter, thank you so much, and I support 100% what you just said, so thank you for presenting that. Any other questions? Thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
Next, we have Ball State University. Come forward, please.
Wow. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the State Budget Committee. I come before you today to ask for approval of a new $7.8 million championship performance center that will be constructed adjacent and connected to Worthen Arena, where we play lots of basketball, gymnastics, volleyball, and those sorts of sports, as well as the Don Shondell Practice Center. It'll have a focus on strength, conditioning, nutrition, and athletic training for all Ball State athletic programs aside from football, so 18 of our 19 athletic programs, and it will be funded entirely through gift funds. It's a 10,000 square foot facility, and with a cost of $780 a square foot, in line with comparable facilities when adjusted for inflation. It's important because it will provide a first-class environment to recruit and retain student athletes and accommodate the growth and flexibility required for competitive NCAA Division I athletic programs. It aligns with our comprehensive master plan and strategic plan and will enhance the Cardinal athletic experience. But also, as Dr. Morrison so eloquently put, athletics is really an important piece, more than just for the student athletic experience, but as we think about how universities should be catalysts for our communities, I know we talked about that last time I was here with our Village project, but we not only serve as an anchor institution in East Central Indiana and a major employer, we not only bring nearly 20,000 students to campus, but we also bring lots of visitors to our community. Our campus, not including academic sorts of visits and exchanges, brings more than 465,000 visitors to campus, and more than 220,000 of those are to athletic events. Those visitors visit our local businesses and restaurants, but also importantly, provide a really important quality of life. You know, to have an Division I athletic experience, to bring a family of 4 to a men's basketball game, for example, for less than $50 is a really great asset to East Central Indiana. So I think that's also an important thing to consider. So we do expect to begin construction in February of next year with occupancy by January of '26. So we are looking forward to those facilities being online. With that, happy to answer questions.
Any questions? Thank you for presenting. And then last on university projects is Representative Cherry's alma mater, Purdue University.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Alicia Nafziger with Purdue University. We have quite a bit of projects before you, so I will try to be brief and happy, of course, to answer any questions. The first is a Purdue in Indianapolis lease at Indiana Avenue, totaling a little over $28 million. This is a 159 apartments that will provide 427 beds to students. This building will be a new build owned by Arrow Street Development, which is located off of Indiana Avenue, sandwiched between the avenue and the canal. This lease is a 5-year lease beginning in the 2026-27 academic year and ending in the 2030-2031 academic year. Rates for this apartment building will be set in our fall 2025 Board of Trustees meeting, but they will be equivalent to Lux, which is a lease you have already approved Lux lease expires after the spring 2026 semester, and then this is seen as a replacement for that lease. And to give you a range, right now, beds at Lux are ranging between $12,500 and $20,000 per academic year.
Thank you. Any questions? Continue, please.
So the next project is another lease at Purdue Fort Wayne off of St. Joe Road. This is totaling a little over $18 million. It will be 85 apartments that provide 289 beds for student housing in Fort Wayne. This is a new build being built by a private developer on land owned by the Purdue Fort Wayne Foundation, which is similar to a recent situation that we brought before you in West Lafayette with the 3rd and West lease. We currently master lease around 389 beds in Fort Wayne. This will allow us to get out of various smaller leases that are also a little farther from campus and then condense beds available closer to campus. And happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Continue, please.
Okay, so the next project is, again, in Purdue and Indianapolis. This is our academic success building, Purdue's first build on the Indianapolis campus. The project totals $187 million. It did receive $60 million in state funding in the last budget, of which we are very appreciative. We are additionally providing $25 million in operating reserve funds, and then we will be taking out $102 million in non-fee replaced debt. The debt issued will be serviced solely from our housing and dining revenues. The project will be constructing approximately 252,000 gross square feet mixed-use facility, which will serve as a gateway for the Indianapolis urban campus near the intersection of West Street and Michigan Street. The scope of the project allows for retail, several floors of academic programming with a number of classrooms and general use labs, and then multiple floors of residential space, including nearly 500 beds and indoor dining facilities with estimated capacity of 400 seats. There will also be some outdoor seating, amenities, and green space will be included in this project. And the building will also have an additional level just to support the mechanical equipment, and then it will be open to students, business partners, and the local community. Right now, for fall of 2024, Purdue and Indianapolis enrollment was a little under 2,900 students. We have plans to increase that enrollment to roughly 3,100 by 2028. The student breakdown right now is 50% engineering, 20% science, largely computer science, and then 30% Purdue Polytechnic Institute.
Thank you. Any questions? Or Senator Garten?
Mr. Chair, do you mind if we jump back to item 7 just for a second?
No, that's fine.
With
Yeah.
Alicia.
Yeah, most definitely.
Alicia, can you go back to 7 for me, please?
Sure.
Because I missed something, and I think it's important. So I want to make sure I heard you correctly. So on item 7, it's a 5-year lease, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So if my math is correct, that's about $13,159 and some change per. So does that mean you guys are subsidizing the rest? Because I thought you said they started at 12 and a half?
So that is what the current rates for Lux, the lowest end is $12,500 and it goes up to $20,000. So, and those Lux rates will increase next year. So it will be the equivalent of what an additional year at Lux would be.
So what's that come out to? I mean, give me an average on that. What do we, you're in the black, I'm assuming, right?
Yes, yeah, and we don't make any money off of our leases. So for that first year, if you just divide the cost of the lease by the number of beds available, that's $12,616. So there are some additional costs for maintenance that we include in it. So it will be starting over $12,500.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Any other questions? Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I was looking through this. We're looking at these, I guess, public-private ventures in regards to housing. So who's going to own the title to these buildings that's on this land?
So are you talking about the academic
housing.
success building?
Yes, the housing.
So the academic success building, I believe, and Tom could probably correct me, that land is still owned by IU. And then we will own the building that is on top of the land. We have a lease for that land with IU.
So in regards to the housing, so when you have a private company building the housing, who's going to own that building? And
So like if we're talking about Purdue Fort Wayne Foundation owns the land, the developer owns the building that is being built on that land.
Okay, so it's a land lease with the building.
Yes.
Is that across all the new development on housing?
No, each different project we bring before you, there's some different scenarios. This one, like for Purdue Fort Wayne, for example, is similar to a setup that we brought before you, I believe in the spring at Purdue West Lafayette, where the foundation owns the land, the developer builds the building, owns the building that is built on that land owned by the foundation.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Can you please?
Okay, so the next project is Biochemistry Building, which houses the Office of the State Chemist, and this is a lab renovation totaling $16.5 million. It will be funded by Auxiliary Funds Other, which is actually the reserve funds for the Office of the Indiana State Chemist. Purdue houses the state chemist, who is charged with administering several agricultural laws involving animal feed, fertilizers, pesticides, and seed. This will be a 19,000 gross square foot project, which will create more updated and efficient use of the space for the chemists on the first and second floor of the biochem building. Now these offices and lab spaces are co-located, making the mechanical systems for those rooms massively inefficient. This project will separate the office and the labs and stack the labs on top of one another on the first and second floor of the building. There have been no major renovations to this space since additional annex was built on that building in 1978, and all renovations have been limited to individual rooms since that time.
Any questions? You're kind of picking on me. That's the year I graduated. It's been a long, long time ago. Continue, please.
Okay, so the next project before you is Purdue Northwest Fitness and Recreation Center roof replacement. This is a little over $2.6 million. It is funded by both our R&R appropriation for Northwest, as well as half of the regional deferred maintenance appropriation that we received. The project will replace an approximately 3,200 square foot roof area on the Fitness and Recreation Center, and then existing lower roof sections will be removed and replaced with a new single-ply roofing system. It was originally installed in 1992.
Any questions? Can you please?
The next project, the Mathematical Science Building Data Center renovation, totals $16 million, which will be funded by operating reserve funds. We have high-performance supercomputers that provide researchers at Purdue with advanced computing capabilities, supporting a wide range of computational and data-intensive research, which also requires specialized data center facilities. So this renovation will allow for additional physical space within that data center, and we will be adding new servers. In order to support the growth and the electrical distribution capacity, So in order to support the growth, the electrical distribution capacity will be increased along with the chilled water distribution capacity to that area.
Any questions? Thank you for presenting. You have one more?
I have a couple more, yes.
Go ahead, please. Okay.
So the next is at the Purdue West Lafayette campus. This is the Reed Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory equipment replacement. ADDL is a line item we have under Purdue. In the last budget, ADDL received a $5 million capital appropriation. Obviously, what you have before you is for $4 million. We are currently working with the budget agency on drawing down the additional million, which we hope to have before you in December. So ADDL is Purdue's animal disease diagnostic lab, opened in 1912, and provides statewide veterinary diagnostic testing of diseases, including those that may affect the human population. The lab is certified to perform high-volume testing for pathogens of national interest. The project before you will modernize the existing facility and meet regulatory compliance. It includes the removal and replacement of an existing incinerator with a new incinerator, installation of a new vertical chute, so think cattle chute system, and then hydraulics and controls. It also provides new stainless steel walls and ceiling within the cooler, replaces the cooler flooring, and replaces a single exterior door with a new double door, easier to get the large animals in and out.
Thank you. Any questions? Continue, please.
The next project is West Lafayette. It's the Stewart Center and Purdue Memorial Union Courtyard improvements totaling a little over $3.1 million. This project will eliminate active leaks in the Stewart Center below the courtyard, and it will provide additional ADA accessible entrance to the Stewart Center.
Thank you. Questions? Continue, please.
Okay, last project at West Lafayette. This is the Wetherill Lab Drain and Supply Line Replacement Phase 2. This is $2.1 million coming from operating funds. It's the second of a planned four-phase lab drain replacement of chemistry on the West Lafayette campus. The project includes installation of potable and lab water supply, piping systems, and vertical risers with chases for the new water piping from basement to attic.
Any questions? Thank you. I believe now we're ready to move to the review items. And the one that I have first is Department of Transportation. If they would come forward, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Jeff Clanton, INDOT Director of Major Projects Delivery, and I'm here to brief you on our Safer Drive 65 Design Build Best Value RFP. This project is to be funded through our statewide transportation improvement program using a combination of state and federal funds. It's an added travel lanes and pavement rehabilitation project on I-65 in Clark and Scott counties, half-mile north of Blue Lick Road up to the State Route 56 interchange near Scottsburg, a total of 13 miles. The design build best value procurement method is done through the Indiana P3 statute, public-private partnership. However, in this case, there is no private sector financing. We are fully financing the project.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Next, we're going to switch the order in terms of what you have on your agenda, members of committee, and jump down to number 3, Commission on Higher Education. If they come forward, please. Floor is yours. Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Chris Lowry, and for the past 30 months, as of tomorrow morning, I've had the privilege of serving as Commissioner for Higher Education here in Indiana. Thank you so much for hosting us. I think, Seth, we're probably working on the technical side, right? Yep. Okay, thank you. Joining me today, I think most of you know, in fact, he's probably reported to some of you over the years, is Seth Henshaw, our CFO. So we'll be walking through this update on the outcomes-based performance funding formula. Keep proceeding. Okay. Oh, very good. So you do have the copies in front of you. As I said, I've been commissioner now for 30 months, and I'll share with you a couple of things that coincided at about that time, and this is one of those. As I came into this role 2.5 years ago, one of the very first things that was presented to me was the work of the interim working group, the 2021 interim working group around the outcomes-based performance funding formula. As probably all of you recall, there were 3 key directives in it as we looked at the outcomes-based performance funding formula. One was to consider mission differentiation amongst the 7 public institutions. 2 is to use more recent data. And 3, to compare institutions against themselves instead of against one another. Frankly, I hadn't been involved in that work, but I thought it was really important the way these 3 bullet points laid out. In fact, I would share with you, as we have moved forward with the Commission in the past several years, not only have we paid a lot of attention to those items specifically for the outcomes-based performance funding formula, but we've been keenly focused on things like more recent data. I would share with you, it's incredibly frustrating for me, whether I was my days in the private sector or at Ivy Tech or in this role, to try to make really good decisions based on very lagging data. So just wanted to share that with you. Also, certainly, Senate Enrolled Act 366, I think, had either just passed or was about to pass, requiring this report and presentation to the State Budget Committee. And then, of course, in the 2023 session with the budget bill, further down the road with this, including the phased-in approach of this revised funding formula. So, as I said, there were a lot of things that were coinciding. When I was asked to take this role by the Commission, there were challenges that we had identified, and I think they speak very much to the direction that was taken with the outcomes-based performance funding formula. We began a situation assessment almost 2.5 years ago around our challenges, and the big goal to which higher education and all of you have been referring for about the last 15 years is around our post-secondary educational attainment rate for working age adults. When this was beginning to be counted back in 2009, the state was at about 33% for associate degrees and higher. The most recent data, and again, this is lagging data, come from 2022, happens to be when I started in this role, and as of that time, 42% of working age adults had associate degree and higher. So why am I sharing this with you? We know that we're in a competitive position with our fellow states, including in our neighborhood, if you will, and around the country, and certainly with other countries as we approach what we're doing, holistically from economic development and certainly higher education, educational attainment being part of that. The reason I point this out to you is while there has been movement, the original measures were 2 years and higher, associate degrees and higher. At the time in 2009, Indiana was ranked 39th in the nation at associate degrees and higher. And as of the 2022 data, as you see here from the Lumina Foundation, Indiana is ranked 39th in the nation. We can do better, and we must do better for our fellow Hoosiers, for our businesses, for our economy, and I know all of you are in agreement in that, and I'll speak to a couple of things here in a moment that have been, frankly, rather humbling, the support we've received, including from the General Assembly. Similarly, as new data was starting to be counted by the Lumina Foundation and all of us as states to compare, where the state really started to excel in the last 8 to 10 years was in sub-associate degree credentials, so certifications, technical certificates, and certificates primarily driven, almost exclusively driven by Ivy Tech, Community College, and Vincennes University. So Adding those into the mix, Indiana is now 28th in the nation in overall attainment, just understanding the weighting that takes place there now. The graph on the right, I'm sharing with you because it was something that when I saw it for the first time this past summer, I was really struck about what we need to be getting done. Certainly we've been focusing on the graph on the left and the data underneath it, but I was shown this one, and it's a really interesting graph that shows all 50 states traversing from about 75 years past up through 2022 in post-secondary attainment by state, bachelor's degrees and higher. Frankly, little did the fiscal analyst on our team who showed this to me expect what I was going to do. I went back to about the time I was born, which was 1962. And at that time, roughly early 1960s, Indiana was basically tied with a couple of other states, and I know we compare ourselves, for economic purposes and so forth. Those states were Georgia and North Carolina. And in 2022, well, you can see the data on the right-hand side, Georgia is now 23rd in the nation in that ranking, and North Carolina is 20th. I hope you all know, when I see data like this, I just want to know why. To me, we should be curious about those things and say, so what has taken place? Well, I would share with you, I don't have a big report on that right now, but we are digging into it and understanding, what have other states done that we might duplicate or replicate? And certainly in a few weeks when we gather for your larger budget hearing, we'll share some of that and some things that you all have supported, some things have been agency-driven to start moving the needle on a couple of key things. So, as we looked at this in conjunction with all of you and many, many other stakeholders about 2 years ago, it's pretty intuitive, but what really became clear is if we're going to build a working age population with higher levels of educational attainment, there are really three basic components to that. What's going in on the front end, and we talked a lot starting a couple of years ago about the decline in the college going rate. You may remember I made a lot of noise about that. We had dropped from 68 to 53% in a matter of a decade. Certainly other states had dropped. Ours was more precipitous than many. Completions. There have been a lot of promising signs on completion rates in Indiana because the General Assembly and others have focused on it. The institutions have focused on it. I'll come back to that in a moment. So, getting individuals in at the right things that they want to study and the economy needs, getting them to complete, and then once they're done, getting them to stay. You may recall we started pointing out a couple of years ago that Indiana at the time was 9th best in the nation at attracting students here to our public and private institutions. I've got an update for you. We're 8th now in the nation, so that's a good thing. We all know this, and by the way, I've lived here all but 1 year of my life, and I love this state. I recognize we don't have ocean beaches and we don't have mountains, but you know what? We have really good public and private institutions that are attracting people to our state. They're a good value. I just saw a report from the Strata Foundation, Education Foundation this morning. Aside from California and Washington State, Indiana is on the next tier of what are considered to be, by Strata Education, the most affordable institutions in the nation. Right? There are a lot of reasons that Indiana's institutions are attractive, offering high quality, relatively good prices. By the way, we can always improve on all of those things. But those are predicates, I think, to this discussion. So in 2022, as we started looking at these things, you see the data where we baselined. And a number of the strategic initiatives we pursued, whether it was expansion of enrollment for 21st century scholars, whether it was the new outcomes-based performance funding formula, the new pre-admission strategy at the Commission, and others have contributed to those. We'll talk much more about those in a few weeks with you. Lastly, though, as I get ready to flip the page and do one more page and then turn it over to Seth, because he probably has the details that you want to hear most about, I would share with you yes, I express frustration in using lagging data. We have revamped a part of the Commission, moving from a research arm within that institution to a business intelligence arm. And with that, we are now focusing on leading indicators and just now also beginning to forecast on the initiatives that you all approve and or support so that we can provide a better look to the future and be on top of these things rather than looking up one day and saying, well, hey, we're still here or there. Specifically in enrollment, last year and this year, we've been able to share that after having experienced a 12-year decline, I think it was, in enrollment last year and this year, enrollment at our public and private institutions are up. In fact, this is the largest increase since the height of the recession in 2010. And it's heading in the right direction, even at the institution level and looking at resident enrollment. Most of the institutions are up, specifically in Indiana resident enrollment, so promising signs. I don't think we'll have this here today for you, but in the completion rates, those have continued to climb. Indiana's now 11th best in the nation. I think we should be at least top 10. My preference is that we're the top one, because that's an important value, part of the value equation, that if people are going to invest their time and their money, or the state's money, other funders' money, then they need to complete so that they have something to show for it and help them thrive in our society. And then on graduate retention, within the new outcomes-based performance funding formula, graduate retention was added there. What I would tell you is the institutions have embraced it with alacrity. Because of the way you pushed us 2 years ago, each public institution, university, has a graduate retention plan. I know you'll hear from the university presidents shortly and so forth. I won't mention which ones, but they've each got details now about their strategy and initiatives they're deploying with employers, with alumni, with students to bolster our ability to keep those individuals in Indiana and stem the brain drain that states are experiencing. So lastly, as I turn it over to Seth, I wanted to share with you what I've interpreted as critical components to this, having heard from many of you and then legislature and others, especially starting last year, that this is really a three-legged stool, if you think about it. I think oftentimes something like this can only be thought of perhaps as an incentive, or only thought of as an accountability tool. I know many of you all the way back to my days at Hillenbrand in the private sector. I firmly believe those things go together, that incentives and accountability have to be tied together, and we believe the outcomes-based performance funding formula is. That this is an investment, that this is an investment on the part of our taxpayers. We want it to be attainable, but we want it to be a stretch. And that it's a policy that is, in essence, is a boardroom narrative, whether it's one of you, whether it's one of the university presidents, whether it's me, that we can speak to what we're driving here in order to improve outcomes for our fellow Hoosiers and our economy. This also aligns with something I think maybe most of you are familiar with, that we introduced in April of 2023, coinciding with the end of the budget session that year. We refer to it as the HOPE Agenda. Quite simply, it is the strategic plan for the Commission for Higher Education. All of these things are part and parcel to that. We want you to know that. And frankly, much of it was driven by the work that was required of us through the original page that I was sharing with you, going back to the working group in 21 and henceforth from there. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to Seth Henshaw unless you have questions of me right now.
I have one.
Yes, sir.
Do we have data, it may take years to get that, on what the average salary is for those that are graduating? Because obviously we know that it's over 2 to 1, that in some occupations, 100,000 and more is not unusual, maybe it's just starting, and others maybe 40,000. Just to have that data, to see how things are trending, because from the state's perspective, that's also important. So, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Commissioner Lowry. Sorry.
No, yes, sir. Yeah, thanks, Senator.
Thank you. Commissioner, thanks for that. And I'm going to ask a couple things, and these are things that we've talked about before.
Sure.
So certainly, I don't think these will come as any surprise to you, but can you remind me and remind the committee when our universities found out the metrics for 25 through 27?
Yeah, absolutely, Senator, I can lean into that. The Budget and Productivity Committee, which is a working group of the commission, held, I believe, 3 or 4 separate public committee meetings on the topic of outcomes-based performance funding. And so we made adjustments, back and forth communication with the committee members, the university staff. I mean, frankly, Commissioner and I have had conversations with the government affairs teams to the university presidents and finance staff all summer long. The commission voted on the goals, the metric, the formula we're presenting today on September 27th at our September 27th commission meeting. That sounds close, maybe, yeah. And then the Budget and Productivity Committee would have met 2 weeks before that to go over the same material. So we do pride ourselves on having a very collaborative relationship with the institutions, but I will also say, and I think I mentioned it in a little bit in the presentation, we take all of their feedback. We take their good ideas, but we do not necessarily take all of the recommendations and ideas that they give us. I think Commissioner Lara mentioned in the stool, we need there to be an opportunity. These goals have to be obtainable, right? For the institutions to buy into a performance funding formula, they have to see an opportunity to earn additional state support through it. But at the same time, the commission needs the institutions to increase performance and output so that we can meet those state goals.
So Seth, I appreciate that. I want to focus on the timeline there, though. Certainly you and the commissioner can understand the issue with that. We put our universities in a position to really have to raise tuition because they were unknown how they were going to get funded. Is that correct?
Great question. So the institutions will know the minimum amount of both years of new funding the spring before fiscal 26. So essentially, as the legislature is wrapping up the legislative session, we will have the data necessary to tell them how much they will earn of their year 1 funding. And part of the model is that whatever an institution earns in year 1 becomes the base or floor amount for year 2, specifically to address that issue. So there is still an uncertainty with year 2. If they earn 60% of their funds in year 1, they know they'll at least get that 60% in year 2, but they do not know about the remaining 40%. And that is really a component of using more recent data, trying to take some of the lag out of the equation.
So you referenced 26, but what about 25?
Yeah, great question. Institutions were made aware of their 25 funding, I believe, in March of this year.
Right, but they would have had to have went ahead and planned on raising tuition, correct?
Great question.
Because of the unknown. That's what I'm really drilling down on.
Yes, institutions do not know exactly how much state support they'll get in the second year of each biennia in the funding model. That is absolutely true.
And again, these are conversations we've had, but I really get hung up on completions and enrollments and when we talk about outcomes based in metrics and Commissioner, you mentioned incentives and accountability. We've talked about this before, right? We fund enrollment, and I would really like to see us heavily fund completions, because if we fund completions, enrollments take care of themselves. And so I really have a hard time with us, putting a number and incentivizing enrollments, because enrollments doesn't equal completions, and we've seen that historically, time and time and time again. And so, I liken this, the example that I always use is, right, I can't think of a business that pays a sales rep on how many cold calls they make. They get paid on how many sales they make. But it seems like here we've got a system that we're incentivizing enrollments instead of completions. Not that we're not incentivizing completions, we are. So I want to be fair about that. But again, I would like to see us, and Mr. Chair, for us to really consider the completions piece of this, because if we do that, and we heavily incentivize completions, they have no choice but to drive enrollment.
If I could really quickly, and I'll turn over to the Commissioner, I just want to add, we'll get into this in just a little bit in the presentation, Senator. We had a very serious, long conversation this summer at the committee level with institutions about where the trajectory is with the metrics that we've been measuring, not just the new metrics, but even completion metrics. And one of the challenges we're facing, I mentioned, one of the reasons we think it's important to talk about the policy purpose of the funding formula from the Commission's lens is because we could create a funding formula that is extremely challenging, set very aspirational goals. But the reality is, if the institutions then view that as an unobtainable model, they will disengage from us. And what we're seeing on the completion side is that after a decade of declines in the college going rate, They are leveling off in their completions now from where they were in a peak. They've been on a decline for several years, right? It's the simple equation of the inflow is reduced, the outflow is reduced. Because the model is a performance improvement model, what we recognize going through this is, in the modeling that we've done, is that it will be extremely, extremely challenging for them to meet all of those completion goals if we put all the weighting there. So what we've tried to do to address that is shift a little bit of weighting to what we're calling leading indicators, low-income youth enrollment, adult enrollment, and also shifting weighting into those areas that are not count-based, they're rate-based. So on-time graduate completion, how well you do with the people you do, the students you do serve.
Sure. And
then graduate retention, the share of those students that you do complete that stay and work here in Indiana. So there's this balancing act, but Senator, I completely hear you, and we spend a lot of time talking about the weighting, which is at the end of the presentation, which is how we try to balance all these different functions to make sure that institutions are aspirational, that we're aspirational in what we're asking them to do, but also we recognize that it takes 4 to 5 years to complete a bachelor degree. And if we set a goal for next year, the reality is we can tell you with some amount of certainty whether or not they are, or how challenging, I guess, it is. And so through the lens of trying to be performance improvement and not just a flat, measure of how well are they doing, against their national peers or the other institutions, that's one of the reasons why we've kind of leaned into those rates and those leading indicators.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Yeah, and the other thing I would add, Senator, we have had those discussions, and we really did try to take those into account. The formula the way it is today, and Seth, correct me if I'm off on this, that for the four-year institutions, the completion side of it is about 2/3 of the formula, the other third being divided by the other two categories, because it is so important. And we recognize that. I think with Ivy Tech, Seth, it's about 85% of the formula because, it is yet even different than the base of the four-year institutions. So we agree that's critically important. And then I think it was also important to recognize that within enrollment, we weren't looking for just an increase in the number, just, that might end up churning, but really in those areas where we were seeing the largest challenges. As we started to pull apart that enrollment and specifically college going rate, what we found were challenges among adult populations, and we've actually, it doesn't come out in here, but we've focused on some specific populations that have seen the largest challenges. But then also in low-income youth, that when we look at the decline in the college going rate over that decade or so, and again, not only Indiana, but the decline has been to a great degree driven by low-income students who, for a variety of different reasons, haven't accessed it. Quite frankly, that's a tougher challenge for the universities to say, hey, we need to be focusing on low-income Hoosier students and trying to get them into this opportunity. But we absolutely recognize that, Senator. That's why we've tried to give that balance, but also, as I said, not just focusing on increasing enrollment, but rather, where can we do that in a pretty targeted way?
Sure. So, and again, you and I have had these conversations, and I always smile because we talk about outcomes-based funding formula, but I think we both have admitted enrollment isn't an outcome. So I can't help but smile when we look at it like that. But to that point, when you talk about low-income students, when we look at 21st century scholars, we look at our Pell students, talk to me about the trend of that with regards to completion.
Well, yes, Seth, you may want to jump in here too. What we do know is that with low-income students, for example, with 21st century scholars, their completion rates have improved dramatically since, I think it's 2014, Seth. I wasn't around for that.
What is it now? I apologize, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but what is the completion rate on our 21st century scholars program?
The extended time completion, we'll pull that up.
Sure, thank you.
It's over 50% for completion for scholars. The main data point I can share is that the 21st Century Scholars Program, one of the things that it has done such an exceptional job at is it basically removes income from a factor in completion. So 21st Century Scholars students complete roughly at the state average, whereas low-income students complete significantly lower than the state average.
Sure.
But we can provide that to you shortly.
Sure, thank you.
And Senator, I would add too that I think, what you all have done along the years, not just in this budget that I was involved in, but by placing that emphasis has really been a catalyst because it's been placed in here for the institutions, one of the things that I've done a lot in the last 2 years is spend time on campuses, including this one. And almost always what I want to do is meet with students. Faculty administrators are interesting if they hear me, but I really want to hear from students. And oftentimes what I'm looking for, just recently did up in Bloomington, was to meet with 21st century scholars, to see how they are, how they are supporting those students, how they're pushing and pulling them, trying to extend that scholar success program that takes place in high school, to help them be good students, to help them have good outcomes. And frankly, I take no credit for it, but those improvements that Seth was talking about, where they're becoming right in line with the average student, I think speak to that work. I think the requirements through the formula, but then also the work of the institutions, again, being held accountable and incentivized to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Continue, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Thank you, Commissioner, or members of the committee, excuse me. Thank you, Commissioner. I want to spend a little bit of time refreshing the committee on how the model actually works. This is really the structure of what we created 2 years ago before I get into some of the adjustments that we're making this biennia. So essentially what the model does is it establishes goals or targets based off of performance trends in some number of 8 different metrics at each of our institutions. As Commissioner Lowry mentioned, the legislative working group in 2021, one of the requests they made of the commission to investigate was comparing institutions against themselves, and so we do that. So we have 15 distinct, if you will, entities with 7 to 8 goals each. So there's a considerable amount of data that goes into this, and in the report that we provided, a list of all of those goals by campus should be included as an attachment in the back. So what we're doing is we're essentially annually measuring performance against those goals. And for any goal that is fully met in that year, they earn 100% funding in that metric based on the weighting we'll get to momentarily. For partial funding, they can actually earn some number of those dollars based on progress they make from where they are today towards the goal, and that's a linear equation. So if you make 50% progress towards the goal, you earn 50% of that metric. And as we mentioned previously, for this biennia, we will be basing the initial data off of fiscal year 23, and then fiscal 24 data will indicate funding for fiscal 26, or sorry, I should say academic year 23-24 will determine the funding in fiscal 26, and then the following academic year will determine the funding for fiscal 27. So that brings us to our first update or modification to the formula, and that is the creation of a bonus allocation. Something we learned, and again, we treat this as a tool. This is not the third rail. This is not some holy creature. We treat it as a tool to achieve the objectives in the Commission's strategic plan. And something we recognized is that the funding formula, as it exists previously, does not allow an institution to really benefit from far exceeding the goal that the Commission places for it. Give an example. Vincennes University's on-time completion rate went from 21% to 31% for their associate degrees. 31% is a historic high for that institution. And frankly, keeping it there for a couple of years and making that the new norm in and of itself is going to be challenging for them, and it is going to be beneficial for their students as they continue to build after that. And something I want to remind members who may be questioning, is 31% really good? Again, the model is an improvement-based model. We aren't comparing one institution's graduation rate to another. We're just saying, what has your trend been? Where are you headed? And then we establish a goal that's more challenging than the direction that they're currently headed. And so what we wanted to do is find a way to allocate some amount of otherwise unearned funding in an institution's own line item for those goals that exceed the target the Commission has set. We estimate that if this would have been in place in fiscal 25, we would have distributed an additional $1.3 million across the 7 institutions, which would have raised total funding distributed from 74% to just under 80% in funding. So again, this is not dramatic in the sense that we are not looking for some mechanism to simply distribute all the funds. These are still performance-based distributions, but it does provide an opportunity for the Commission to better incentivize the institutions to go even further than simply reaching or making progress towards the Commission's goal. And then again, there will be no fund movement between the institutions. This is just money unearned from an institution's own appropriation after the initial allocation. And it's important to us because we believe it reinforces both the investment and incentive legs of that policy stool. Here's an example of what that bonus allocation looks like. I won't walk all the way through it, but one thing that's important to understand is that the weighting remains the same. You know, something that was very important that our commission spent a lot of time talking about is they wanted to make sure that the institution couldn't earn 100% of their funding by only exceeding one goal that we set. So that is impossible. The model is created such that they can only earn essentially less than double for any individual metric. Here, in this example, with exceeding 2 of the goals set by the commission, the institution would have earned an additional $75 of the $400 available, still would have raised the total distribution to below the $400 at $325. So again, it does distribute additional dollars for those metrics where they excel, but it will not fully fund the institution simply by meeting 1 or 2 of the goals that we've set. With that, I'll move on to metrics. So we've talked about how the model works. Now we want to share what are we measuring. As Senator Garton mentioned, we do include 2 measures of enrollment in the model. The overwhelming weight, both in the count of metrics and the dollars allocated, are still in completion. Something we want to highlight for the committee that I think is very important and the commission is very proud of, and the legislature should be very proud of because there were legislative components to the policies as well. Indiana's on-time completion rate has improved by 20 percentage points in the last 12 years. We won't say that that is entirely causal as it relates to the funding formula, but we think that there's absolutely a relationship there. We incentivized completion for over a decade, and we moved on-time completion over 20 percentage points. Extended time completion, which would be 6 years for a bachelor degree, moved up 13 percentage points. There's been huge ground move there. So we know that these incentives do matter and they do make a difference. And then finally, we have 2 metrics that are, one is very new, one is old that we've brought back. A very new one is graduate retention. We're very excited about the work in this. We talked a little bit earlier about wage outcomes. Well, the same data that leads to wage outcomes is the data that we are relying upon. It's DWD wage data to identify whether these individuals are employed here in the state or continue to be enrolled here in the state after graduation. And so we're excited to continue moving down that pathway. And as the commissioner mentioned, we've seen a lot of progress from the institution standpoint in this being something that we're hearing a lot more talk. IU-PUI separation at IU Indianapolis and Purdue Indianapolis, continue to hear more and more and more from both of those campuses about the value of that investment in meeting the workforce needs of Central Indiana, which directly correlates with graduate retention. And then research is a component of the funding formula that actually existed for a decade in the early 2000s. It's essentially only for our R1 institutions in West Lafayette and Bloomington, although there's a lot of conversation about research campuses swirling around. But at this time, it's those 2 institutions, and it measures research expenditures in the year. And I think it is kind of fun because West Lafayette and Bloomington seem to go back and forth in the federal report that we utilize to measure this metric. So as we mentioned earlier, we are continuing to see, we're seeing a slowing of the decline in overall degree completions at our institutions. And that's really been driven, though, by this decline in the college going rate, that input component of the pipeline. And so we've recognized this need to balance, funding that the institutions rely upon, and again, that gets them to buy into this in the first place, with the need for the state to increase its overall educational attainment, as Commissioner Lowry kind of brought up at the beginning of the presentation. And what we recognized as we were looking through projections and setting goals earlier this year is that we simply aren't going to move the needle enough if we continue the process of setting goals, which again is very simply looking at 3 to 6 years of performance, modeling out what we anticipate future performance to be, and then adjusting that for improvement, saying do better than where you're headed. And because of that, we have recommended, sorry if I can really quickly, this gets into, Senator Garton, why we talk about enrollment, not just completions. In this example, what we want to highlight here is our institutions, as I mentioned previously, have done an incredible job in improving the number of students who graduate on time. Again, 20 percentage points in the last 12-ish years. But what we're seeing is even when you're doing better, so improving your on-time completion in this example from 50% to 55%, If the input of those students is declined from 1,000 to 900, you will still complete less students in that 4-year period than you otherwise would have at the lower on-time completion rate. And it's for reasons such as this that we are including an adjustment in the weighting we'll get to in just a minute, but we're also saying that those leading indicators and those rates, those metrics that are not tied into the 4 to 5 year timeline of that degree output, those 4 metrics cannot be below the base. So for an example, if an institution's low-income youth enrollment is projected to go down 10%, and we say the goal is to go down no more than 5%, what we're saying here is for these 5 metrics, we're actually setting all of them at a more challenging level to say they cannot decline. You must have at minimum end the decline, flat line, and then realistically to see growth. And so we're doing this intentionally to make these metrics more challenging because we recognize that if we don't do this, if we don't continue to make these more challenging, the state isn't going to reach its overall attainment goals. As I've hinted several times now, one of the, I guess art meets science components of the funding formula, an area that I spend a lot of time speaking with universities about, is weighting. How does the commission allocate the share of dollars appropriated to each of them amongst these metrics? And so we're making some adjustments based on the data that we're seeing, based on conversations with commission members, with university staff. We're shifting some weighting to low-income youth enrollment and adult enrollment as those are leading indicators. And essentially the 6-year of data that it takes to produce a completion would be less impacted or really not impacted by those enrollment metrics. Additionally, the 2 rate-based metrics we have in the formula of on-time completion and graduate retention, those are both rates. So those are just the percentage of the students you have. So regardless of what happens with the number of students you complete, there's still opportunities for the institutions to continue to improve there. And then additionally, shifting weighting to research for those 2 R1 institutions in recognition of the priority they're placing on them and the importance of research, not just to the institution itself, not just to the community it's in, which it is very valuable, but really to graduate retention, as there is a strong tie between research that takes place on campuses or near campuses and the economic opportunities for students both during their education and immediately following. This graph is very busy, I know that, but what we wanted to highlight here is every cell in red has had a weighting reduction from fiscal 25. Every cell in green has had a weighting increase from fiscal 25, and we've broken them down again by enrollment completion, and then we have research and graduate retention. And so I just want to note that. I also want to note, in line with the Legislative Interim Committee's recommendation, we have also further dove into mission differentiation by working with the institutions to better differentiate them amongst themselves in the weighting of the formula. So previously, I believe we had 4 categories of weighting, and you'll see here now there's 7. And then last but not least, we also have a somewhat separate, unique weighting for Ivy Tech, recognizing the unique role that they play both in the state and in the funding formula. And as Commissioner Lowry mentioned, you'll see the overwhelming majority of their weighting is in completions. And I think it's important to note a large reason for that is the rate at which they can change a certificate or even associate completion is much easier than changing a bachelor completion, just because of the time it takes to get that student across the finish line. But with that, there's a lot of information. Happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Seth, just kind of thinking out loud and push back on this. I love the fact that we've had a huge increase in the number that are on time. And do we really want to go back to 7 or 65% or so actually entering a 4-year institution? Is that really the best thing? Or is it better that we have the right students attending those universities and then graduating? Because some, to be honest, are much better off maybe not attending a 4-year and doing something else, because if they attend for a couple years and don't graduate, that's where we have some problems, in my view. If, again, push back, feel free to.
Mr. Chairman, we could not agree more. In fact, we won't get into it today. We'll talk more about it in a few weeks. But we cannot emphasize enough the importance of career coaching and work-based learning experiences. Whether it's Strata Education Foundation that you all know is in the neighborhood, their offices, their headquarters are in downtown Indianapolis, or research from a variety of different organizations, career coaching and work-based learning matter a lot, including in the high school arena. In fact, the career coaching beginning much earlier down in the middle school area. And you all will recall that on a variety of fronts, the General Assembly has begun helping us address that over the last couple of years, whether it's career scholarship accounts, career coaching grants, which just have gone into place this summer. I think there were, Seth, 28 awardees, a total of $25 million. And Mr. Chairman, we think that's critically important because students just have not been getting that college and career coaching that they need. And that's not to disrespect any part of our educational system or any other part of society. We think it's really important for students to make the best informed decision they can, regardless of where that is for their own outcomes too. And as I said, we think that's a really important component. I referenced a report by Strata. They have identified 5 areas, and I think if you all have a chance to read it, we'll send it to you, that we all would agree are really important areas of focus. And then what they've done is classify all of the states. They haven't ranked us, which I also kind of like. They've put us into one of 4 buckets. Think of it as level 1 through 4. And their report essentially said that there's not a state in the nation that's doing career coaching or work-based learning very well. And I literally called them after I read that, and I said, oh my gosh, I couldn't agree. Yeah, I really agree with that. And again, that's not to disparage our state, but states aren't doing a very good job of it. And but it was also kind of fun calling them and saying, yeah, but our legislature has tried to get ahead of this. And we're part and parcel to that because you gave us responsibilities as the commission for some of those strategic initiatives.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Duskowski.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. And all I want to do is just comment on that, too. I think we have begun to go back to a time when we did do things, I think, better in so many ways. I can remember when I graduated from high school, I had a major in metals. And we have to know that it is higher education. We need to get these higher attainment levels, but we need to be able to reach these children at a younger age, give them the opportunity to instill values in their lives so that can make a true living for them in whatever direction they choose. They got to know that there are more options. And I know we've begun down that path, but we have to do so much more. I did not choose that trade, but I could have gone directly to work in that trade when I graduated from high school, and there were many others, and we had good studies back at that time, and we've begun again, but we have to give students all the opportunities available.
And Senator, I'd second that motion. Some of you know I spent 8 years at Ivy Tech before coming to this role and had the privilege of standing up and then leading for 6 of those years the workforce side of the college. I also grew up in a home that reached middle class because my father did an apprenticeship with General Motors. First generation that was middle class in our family, and it changed the trajectory. I think something very important that you said can't be overlooked. We've got to have an all-of-the-above strategy, which includes industry certificates, bachelor's degrees, certifications, and the like, for us to have a really thriving, robust economy. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman. Yes. If I may really quickly, Representative Thompson, or Mr. Chairman, to your question, the one thing I want to note on the screen here is, and I would be remiss if we didn't note this, I think there's a common misconception, and I think this conversation is perfectly encompassing it, which is that when we talk about higher education, we're only talking about a bachelor's degree. But you can see on the graph here that we're actually talking about a very broad net. When we talk about the college going rate at 53%, that's not bachelor degree going rate at 15%. That's post-secondary education happening after high school. So the one answer I would give you is we do need to get that number up back. 60% is the statewide attainment goal. It's not even the going rate goal, because frankly, if we only had 60% of our students going to college, and even if all 60% of them stayed, we aren't keeping them here after graduation due to brain drain. And that's why, going back to the pipeline, the reason we have 3 parts to that pipeline is because we have to address all 3 parts if we're going to hit that goal. And the only other thing I would note, too, is Indiana is a national leader in the sub-associate space. So those short-term credentials that you hear a lot about, those industry certifications that Ivy Tech is spending a lot of time there leading on, it's in the performance funding formula. We get industry certifications from Ivy Tech. We are 5th in the nation at producing those. So I just want to stress, I think there's this understanding that we send too many kids to traditional college and we need more of them to get those more short-term or skilled trades. The reality is that we are a national leader in the sub-associate space. And to Commissioner Lowry's point, something we spend a lot of time about is that career coaching component of it, so that we can help students identify that career pathway and all the ways in which they can achieve that ultimate goal in that career. That maybe it is an industry certification, maybe it's CTE in high school, maybe it's the career scholarship accounts, or maybe it is that bachelor's degree.
Director Havoc?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner Lowry and Seth. I just had one question, and you may have even stated, I just missed it, but the metrics of low-income youth enrollment and adult enrollment state are leading indicators. What are those indicating, if you could restate that?
Yeah, great question. So we call them leading indicators because we measure them the same way we measure the completion side of that equation. So new to the funding formula in 2025, or fiscal 25, are both of those two adult metrics. The funding formula has never specifically called out adults. So one of the reasons we include adult enrollment in the first place, even though our institutions, our 4-year institutions, currently educate tens of thousands of what we consider adults, which are 25 and older, there's an opportunity to do a lot more there. But if we were going to tell the institutions we need to complete more adult students, we couldn't say next year because it takes several years to get them through that pipeline. So we call them leading indicators because in many ways, it's the way the institutions can quickly move, and we put a lot of pressure to move quicker probably than they would like, to quickly move to achieve some of those strategic objectives. And by that sense, it doesn't take 4 years to enroll someone. But I will also note that some of the institutions are doing very, very well, specifically in that low-income youth enrollment in the last 2 years. And we're very excited about that because low-income youth, and the way we measure it is through Pell, students who receive Pell, they were the ones who dropped off the most in the college going rate over the last 8, 9, 10 years. So.
And Joe, I'll also add this. I mentioned at the start of this that, I don't know, I'll blame my business background. Lagging numbers make me crazy. I'll just say it publicly. And so if you think about the college going rate, we learned that 2 years in arrears. We're literally, the best number we have right now is a month after I started this role. Wow. However, we can get enrollment numbers on a semester basis, right? So, I would say this, there's a likelihood that when we have the college going rate for at least 2024, because we've had 2 years of increase in enrollment in specific areas and such, we're going to see an increase finally in the college going rate. So that's what I mentioned too. We could spend a whole lot of time on that. I would add though too, because I think it's an important factor to think about, there are so many data points underneath these that motivate us toward these actions, right, in a situation assessment, looking at the pipeline and so forth. But the outcomes that we have for individuals and frankly, our economy here in Indiana are directly tied to this. I'll mention one. When we think about the adult population getting skilled up, for example, if this is not in our bailiwick, but if it's going from no high school diploma to a diploma or a high school equivalency, or in our view, more so a high school diploma to a certificate or maybe an associate degree. To me, one of the most stunning data points that we look at across a variety of economic data points is labor participation. Labor participation, if you think of these 4 levels, no high school diploma, some college, including certificates and so forth, or a bachelor's and higher, some colleges, being certificates, associate degree, et cetera. I'll be close on these numbers, so let me just give you rough numbers. Here's how they scale for Indiana. Those 4 levels of education, low 40% labor participation, low to mid 50%, low to mid 60%, and low 70% for labor participation. and I would share with you, one of the things I mentioned, I try to visit the schools a lot. Every community I go to, if I have time, I try to visit with employers and just say, hey, here I am, tear me up. What do you want to know? Throw things at me, things we should be thinking about. And it is that challenge that we all know about to find talent, and certainly tied to all that. But gosh, I would love to spend so much time, and I know, Mr. Chairman, we're probably over our time limit already, but those are also factors that, we really try to consider, and would love to talk with any of you about some of those that we look at to say, how can what you've charged us with as a mission make a difference in those areas too?
Senator Garten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Seth, either one. So, couple things. The first question I've got is on the bonus allocation monies. Correct me if I'm wrong, but those are monies that are still the same initial line item we put in the budget, correct?
Yep, it comes from that same line item. That's correct.
So I'm a little confused. Why weren't those just allocated as standard? Why put them into this? Why weren't they allocated?
Great question. So it's kind of a misnomer calling it a bonus. It's really just we run the formula in two components now. The first component in this example is that initial allocation, and that just says if you have $100 per metric, you fully meet 2 of those goals, you're going to get 100. You halfway meet one of the goals, you get 50. You didn't meet one of the goals, you get 0. That totals $250. The bonus piece of this is just a mechanism to determine, okay, because they actually exceeded the goals fairly substantially. Metric 4 is an example where they exceeded the goal by 50%, right? They blew past the goal that we set in this example. The bonus component of this just is to say, how do we determine how much to pay them in addition to that initial allocation? And so in this sense, we just take the $150 that was not spent or not earned in the initial allocation, we reallocate it based on the same weighting, so the same prioritization, and we say, okay, of the $150, $38 is 25% of that. And so they get an additional $38 for metric 2, an additional $38 for metric 4. But for the budget agency's perspective, they will still get a notification from the commission the same way that just says, please release $325 to institution A. It won't be a please release $250 and then a year later another $75. It'll still all be in the same cadence. It's just the way in which we will measure those metrics where they exceed the target that the commission set.
So, Seth, I appreciate that, and I understand the formula, but the formula wasn't created when we made the appropriation. So the question was, why didn't we appropriate it like the General Assembly intended?
And fully distribute the funds?
Correct.
Senator, that's a great question. We talk about this a lot. One of the questions, Commission Member Bland, a member of our...
And I want to be fair, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to be fair because I don't want you to feel like I'm leading you into something else. These monies are in a reverting fund.
That is correct.
And so I can't help but stand to reason that you're trying to get these out so they don't revert.
Yeah, fair question. I would say, I won't pretend that isn't a part of it. And I think when the commission, asked the question of us early this spring, it was March or April, Dennis Blaine, one of our commissioners, asked, how do you feel about distributing 74% of the dollars that were appropriated? I think the answer I gave is, I feel all right about it. I mean, it means that we set challenging goals. It means that we didn't it's not a gimme, it really is performance-based. I think one of the transitions, and I guess I would add, Senator, we did seek a non-reverting fund as part of the model in 2023, because the idea was of that 26% that wasn't distributed, let's roll it into the next biennia and run it through the formula again, right? So it's still going out through performance, but it's not a one-time snapshot.
And I appreciate that, and I know that because I was involved in some of those conversations on the reverting versus non-reverting. But I guess I would hope that you would understand our position of why we just wouldn't want a pot of money sitting there, especially rolling into what I think is going to be one of the tightest budgets since I've been elected to the General Assembly.
And I think I should be very clear. We're talking about for fiscal 26 and fiscal 27 is what this would apply to.
Sure.
So the 2023 state appropriations, all the money was distributed in fiscal 24.
Sure.
For fiscal 25, outside of legislative intervention, there will be $5.9 million that will revert to the state general fund. But to your question, I mean, I do not anticipate there will be a biennia where 100% dollars are distributed. I think that would lead to a very fair question of, okay, is the funding formula challenging? Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? But I would also say we need to fund our institutions. I mean, they have 2 major levers of funding. We talked about it earlier. And if they don't receive state support, the only other major lever that they have is tuition. Our institutions have led the nation, 6th lowest tuition increases in the last decade. So we're very, very proud of that. But they, as Commissioner Lyer mentioned earlier, they're a great value for students right now. I mean, I know you see the sticker price and it can lead to that sticker price shock, but the reality is the net price, these students are getting an incredible value from our institutions. A huge portion of that is the buying down of that in-state tuition cost that directly comes from the line item appropriation. So it is a balancing act, Senator. We absolutely want to fund the institutions, but we also recognize the General Assembly said it needs to be done through a performance metric, and this is kind of the tool that we've created to do that.
No, and I can appreciate that, Seth. I guess my point is, back to an earlier point that we discussed, what I don't want to do is drive tuition and fees up because they can't attain it or because they haven't gotten the metrics. And I think that's what happened early on initially, so it forced our universities to raise some of that stuff, at least initially.
I would only push back because I believe that, we give Purdue a hard time because they are a high achieving, academically rigorous institution, and clearly, with enrollment and demand, they are very much well regarded in the marketplace. But I just would only note that, it is a balancing act. Sure. I am very thankful that I am not responsible for actually setting tuition at any of our 7 institutions, and we are responsible instead for coming up with a thoughtful recommendation for them not to exceed. But I would note that in the grand scheme of things, the amount that each institution relies on state support varies dramatically, roughly from 15 to 20% to 60%.
Sure.
So I think what you'll see is those institutions with a greater reliance on state support there's a little more volatility at play in the funding formula for them, and we try very hard to take that into consideration when we build the model. But to your point, we absolutely agree, and there is a balancing act there. I guess the one last thing I would note is, at the end, there's always a question when the dollars are appropriated. There's a 1-year question. The second year of the budget, how much of that am I going to earn? Mm-hmm. I know what I'm going to get in the first year before I set tuition. I don't know what I'm going to get in the second year. Something that I would argue is that creates a 1-year lag. The institution could certainly assume that they earn none of that, additional money in the second year. But once they know what they earn, the funding formula has always worked that once you've earned it, it's added to your base. And the commission is no longer recommending reallocation as part of the model. So the institutions have a fair amount of certainty that if I earn this and this biennia, outside of the General Assembly intervening and reducing appropriation, or there's an economic recession as we had during the pandemic and there was reductions made, that dollar amount can be counted on for my operating budget. And so there is a 1-year in question, I don't disagree, but I do believe that once this becomes the new norm, the institutions will be able to operationalize it. I mean, many of them already have.
Sure. I appreciate you saying that out loud. That's been my concern, right? A lot of our fiscal folks across the board, whether they're in higher ed or in the General Assembly, we a lot of times talk about risk mitigation. And the only way a university is going to be able to risk mitigate a fiscal deficit with an unknown is going to be to raise fees and tuitions. And so I'm going to continue to have that concern. Shifting gears a little bit, we often talk about STEM and STEM completion and the shortage of STEM students in the state. When I look at these, and I'm looking at your performance-based funding goals here for each university, and I go through and look, I first want to point out IU Southeast and commend them in the STEM department. It looks like their change is almost 25%, which is the highest of any other university in the state. Now, here's the part I'm a little, I guess I want to question just a little bit. If we've all agreed that there's a shortage of STEM students and a shortage of STEM completions, it looks like that is one of the lowest categories we weight across the entire board for every single university. And so help me understand and reconcile those two kind of thoughts there.
Yeah, great question. The first thing I would note is these metrics are not fully in silos. So a low-income student who graduates with a STEM degree on time will be counted in that institution's benefit for every one of those metrics. So I should note that. The other thing I guess I would say, Senator, is STEM is still, generally speaking, suffering from the same challenges that total completions are suffering from. And that is that the pipeline has shrank dramatically over the last decade. So as we talk a lot about low-income youth enrollment, we're seeing that being one of the more positive. I think that was the most The most funding as a share available was distributed in fiscal 25 from low-income youth enrollment. The institutions are doing a good job there. I think the idea is that over time, as we see that enrollment moving through the pipeline, it'll get to those completions, and then we will look at, do we add additional weighting to those completions now that we've addressed that dip? To your question about the overall rating, why isn't there more in STEM? You know, I'll call out Purdue as an example, West Lafayette. They have a dramatic increase. That was a specific request that they made. We absolutely are supportive of STEM. For most campuses, the challenge is that STEM completions have been impacted as much, if not more, than a lot of other areas. And so if we set those goals at too high a level, they simply wouldn't earn the dollars. I don't have a great answer for you because it's just the sausage of the process of how we distribute the weighting there. But we try to be responsive to the institution's requests as much as we can as far as priorities that their presidents have on those campuses. But we hear you very clearly on that.
Well, so let me give a little more of a specific example. It looks like we weight on-time completion at 25% almost across the board, if I remember correctly, as I look at this. It does vary a little bit, but I think it's everything I'm seeing.
You're correct.
It's 25%.
You're correct.
So I have often in our meetings with some of our university presidents posed the thought-provoking question respectfully. If your university had to co-sign for every student loan, would you offer the same course offerings in the same degrees? And I haven't had one person take me up on that. And so that begs the question, why would we weight on-time completions at 25% and STEM completions at 5%? Because to me, we're incentivizing universities to focus on the things that are easy. Basket weaving, underwater aerobics, all the things that we make jokes about, right? But these are all the degrees that they wouldn't co-sign the student loan for, let's be honest. So why would we weight them so much more than things that are important to the marketplace like STEM?
Yeah, great question. I'll turn to Chris in just a moment, but the one thing I would note is the reason on-time completion is a quarter. Well, let me back up. 2 years ago, on-time completion was half of all performance funding as it had been for several years before that. And so we agree that is it's very important, but we did dramatically reduce that amount of weighting. One of the reasons is because on-time completion, one of the ways you can, in a low-cost way, tackle that is simply by enrolling more academically prepared, higher income students who require less supports to complete online. And so that's, again, why we incentivize things like low-income completion enrollment. The reason STEM is lower than that is there's never a conversation of this or this.
Mm-hmm.
It's simply, you'll notice really across the board there, that band.
And I want to be fair, I'm using STEM as one example.
Yeah.
Just because it's listed, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, there's other examples, but I'm just using that as one for the sake of this conversation.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Senator. What we really did is we made an intentional decision for those count-based completions that are dramatically impacted by the decline in the college going rate. And we said, okay, those are largely down or have declined substantially in that 3 to 6 year period that we use to create a trend to come up with that data to set the goal. And so what we said is, instead of just zeroing those out, or instead of setting goals that are frankly so achievable that they aren't going to move the state forward in any way, we said, let's de-emphasize those this biennia until we turn the completion boat around and emphasize in those things that they can do better in, that are good for students and good for the state, that are rates or leading indicators. So the reason on-time completion went up dramatically, Senator, frankly, is because it doesn't matter if you have 1,000 students in each cohort or 100 students in each cohort. You can do better at you can increase the number of those students whom you've already enrolled, you already have on campus, that complete in 4 years or 2 years for an associate degree. So it was really just a recognition of trying to balance achievability against still needing to move the state forward. But to your question of, could STEM have been a 5% greater amount, 20% greater amount? It absolutely could. The data that we used when we were developing the model told us that by and large, STEM is a challenging area for the institutions. They still have goals. I think when we report back 2 years from now, you'll find, I would not be surprised if STEM, or the areas that are in red, are areas where institutions were less likely to fully meet the commission's goals. And that's another reason why the other side of that is if we made that more obtainable for them, the other side of that is most of those green categories, the goals are harder too, because we set a floor on those goals, which is not something we did last biennia.
And again, I appreciate that, Mr. Chair, thank you. Just in closing, real quick, again, the only point I want to make is if we really want to incentivize our higher education systems and universities to meet market demands, then we're going to have to incentivize in a manner that does that. And I have concerns that we're not doing that. We're more concerned about on-time completion, which I agree is important. I don't want to sound dismissive of that. But is it more important than meeting market demands when folks get out? And that's really the question I'm posing today. So, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a quick comment. Appreciate having this robust discussion today when it comes to higher ed. I just don't think we can lose sight that there needs to be a balance, sufficient balance on career and higher education. We need not to forget that, we need to focus on bachelor's degrees, which I guess Commission on Higher Education pivots to, I guess, deem what the legislature said, credentialing work. And I think others may somewhat disagree, but make us understand that, that we need to really focus on bachelor degrees. If we want to continue to compete with the rest of the states and across this world. So that's the bottom line. And I know we want to learn, but we're talking about 10% of the budget dealing with performance funding, and 90% is other. So I don't want to diminish the important part about performance funding, but I just don't want you guys get the commission wind up pivoting somewhere else, and if we're forgetting what the Commission on Higher Education is supposed to do. So with that, I just wanted to make that comment and appreciate this discussion today.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Porter. I really appreciate that. In fact, the graph on the left of this slide was really central to me when I began this role 2.5 years ago. The reality had been, and we just weren't talking about it as a state. And as I said, let me state for the jury, I love this state. But we have to talk about the things that are a challenge for us. And to remain 39th in the nation after 15 years is significant. And then from the bachelor's degree and higher, that we've roughly been 40th since I was born, and I'm old. It is something that I thought, we've got to pay attention to. So, Representative Porter, what I would say to you is we are trying to pay attention to all of it. I will tell you, as long as I'm privileged to get to do this role, we will not lose sight of it, and hopefully I won't wear out my welcome talking about it. But we've got to have all of the above to have a great economy and for our fellow Hoosiers to thrive. It's also part of the reason, I'm not taking you through this today, but almost every presentation I do, and I do a lot around the state, businesses and schools and anybody will listen, I'll show up. But we talk about those 4 levels of educational attainment that I referenced earlier, and we talk about them distinctly in two key categories, social and economic outcomes. And the fact of the matter is, as we go up, as we step up those levels of educational attainment, and not only does labor participation rate improve, unemployment improves. It's nearly 10% right now for folks in Indiana who have less than a high school diploma, who don't have a diploma. It's hovering around 2% for folks with a bachelor's degree and higher. But then we look at it, obviously, wages and net wealth accumulation, but we also look at it in terms of other things like infant mortality. It is almost 3x between that first level that I referenced and the highest level of educational attainment. Life expectancy, I think the difference now is 13 years across that spread. And of course, they step up with each one. I've yet to find a statistical aberration in 2.5 years of looking at those data. So we hear you loud and clearly, but we just want to assure all of you, we're not going to lose focus on any of them. And I take very seriously that, to look at where those other states have gone, we need to learn from them. And try to bring forward solutions to all of you as we work together.
Representative Cherry?
Yes, I'm sitting here, kind of hard place to look back to you, but I guess I'm looking at outcomes and on completions, and I know I look at the low-hanging fruit out there. There's many students have gone for a year, 2 years, semester, 2 semester, 4, never got to the finish line. And I don't know how much the institutions have reached out to these people that we can have them come back and also work with the business community so they can incentivize maybe cost sharing, and the delivery of education is much different today than when I went through school, and not that that's been that more recent, but again, with COVID, a lot of things have changed, but I think that we could convert many of these to a certificate or associate degree, or work to get their bachelor and its outcome to get more completions. And I think the business community need to be working intact because they could incentivize benefits and help pay for the tuition and get that person across the finish line to get that bachelor degree.
Again, we could not agree more. I would point out two things, just two of some things that are currently underway. The General Assembly charged us last year with Senate Enrolled Act 8 to look at 4 distinct things. I won't go through all of those. But one of those, on which we'll be providing all of you a report later this fall, I think it is. I should know that. Is looking at the ability to award associate degrees to somebody who has been pursuing a bachelor's degree. And then the thing I always point out is, there are a lot of folks who have 60 to 90 hours that are accumulated, and very, very likely many of those folks would qualify for an associate degree, and they're just not getting it because that's just not how we've done things. Wow. I think something that, for example, Ivy Tech has done stunningly well in the last 6 or 8 years has been to be really, really intentional, and also working with employers to help a student understand. We call it stackability sometimes. I think of it as embedding. Chris goes for this associate degree, and whether I make it to the end or not, along the way, and it's in manufacturing, let's say, I've been able to earn credentials from the Manufacturing Skill Standards Council and a certificate, an academic certificate from Ivy Tech, and those types of things. We can be much more intentional. That's just one example of what Senate Enrolled Act 8 required of us to take a look. The other thing that I would reference to you, and I am convinced our state can lead on this, it's credit for prior learning. Until this spring, there were only 7 states that had adopted a framework for credit for prior learning. Credit for prior learning, the sum of it is, in my view, it honors an adult by taking into account his or her work and educational experiences and accounting for those at an academic level. Prior to this spring, there were 7, I believe, states who actually had a framework. We have one now. One of the first things we did, I know after I came, was to say, look, let's be a state that owns that. Again, to honor the adult for the work and educational experiences she or he has had, but also for the sake of our economy. And so we've had a group working on that. We actually have a framework around it, and you're going to be hearing a lot more about that. The universities and colleges have been extremely helpful in that. And again, that's, to me, there's so much waste in not trying to do that. And we're, frankly, we're preventing opportunities from accruing to our fellow Hoosiers if we don't get serious about that. And so more to come on that, Representative Cherry. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Let's back up then to item number 2 on review and do the Invest Ed, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, good to see you this morning.
Thank you. Please, the floor is yours, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Thompson and committee members. My name is PJ McGrew. I am the Vice President of External Engagement with InvestEd, and I have with me Brooke Kyle, the Associate Commissioner of Business Intelligence at the Commission for Higher Ed. Some of you might remember that in our statute, anytime that we go to give a grant, it must be reviewed by the Budget Committee. I believe this is the 4th time we've come before you over the last year to award such a grant. We're real excited today, and I think this grant opportunity is really applicable to the conversation that was just had in terms of being able to look at outcomes for certificate and degree programs and how students navigate that occupational journey after completing their certificate or degree. One of the things that InvestEd does is, in 2013, our statute was changed to where we're really tasked with 2 things, providing financial literacy to students and families on opportunities on how they can access post-secondary at reduced costs and less debt, and then also to create a student loan program. As part of that financial literacy work, we teach students and families about labor market tools, how they can look at their career interests, what jobs are available, wages associated with those careers, and then talk to them about the cost and the educational attainment needed for those careers. This grant opportunity will allow us to take a deeper dive into those outcomes for those students so that as we're having those conversations with them about what their career interests are, we can really look at how they are moving from completion into that maybe initial job and then on further down the line in their career to look at, intermittent wages. What are their wages 1, 3, 5 years out? What does their career path look like? Did they start as a data analyst and then move into a chief intelligence officer and some of those things? And so we're really excited about this. Our board approved this at our August meeting, and we had a subsequent follow-up meeting with CHE to go into some more details on what the tool would include and what that would look like. I believe you all should have received a one-pager on this opportunity, and Brooke can talk through any of the details if you guys have any questions about what we're actually looking at here.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Committee, and thank you, PJ. High-level overview, the Commission is very excited about this potential research proposal with the conversation going on earlier today, truly looking at outcomes and pathways for students. We know that the state is charged the Commission with being more transparent and more accountable for letting stakeholders know what those pathways look like, what the outcomes are associated with those pathways. We're looking specifically for this external partnership, as we believe it is a more effective, efficient use of agency resources that will also enable us to be on a much more aggressive timeline with a much more aggressive set of deliverables. The deliverables that we anticipate from this research project include a robust full report, a predictive model that the Commission will be able to use in determining policy levers, and then of course, as PJ indicated, a public visualization dashboard that is really meant for students, parents, guidance counselors, career coaches to walk students through what do some of those pathways look like, and also segmenting by different groups, including by race and ethnicity, scholar, non-scholar, so that students can find someone or a group of people that look like them maybe and say this is how they achieved those pathways. So happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
Next, we have on the agenda the State Budget Agency.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Budget Committee. Joe Habig, I'm here to present on behalf of the Office of Administrative Law Proceedings. You'll find in your packet there is a one-page memorandum from our office to you all that gives some more context regarding this request, but I'll just start by giving a little bit more historical context. So, per state law, the Budget Agency is required to produce a report on the fiscal impacts of legislation from that session within 60 days of the adjournment of session. So much like what LSA does with legislation, we also do, we score legislation for fiscal impact. And so in doing that, most fiscal impacts are incorporated either in the budget bill when appropriations are considered for those agencies, or they are accounted for in what we call outside acts. And so to the extent those outside act fiscal impacts are absorbable within an appropriation, we note that. And every now and then there are some acts that have fiscal impacts that are not absorbable within an appropriation. And so what we're bringing to you now is a request to augment a $1 appropriation to our office, actually called outside acts, specifically for a section found in House Bill 1380. And so in Section 23 in House Bill 1380, just to remind the committee, if you're not familiar with that, we moved, in that bill, we moved the jurisdiction of independent hearing officers from independent contractors that schools would have to contract with, from them under the purview of the Office of Administrative Law Proceedings. And so by doing that, it created an additional need. I think the data that we saw from LSA was that there's over 100 of these appeals. I think there were over 100 in 2023, and it's growing. And so these appeals will fall now under OALP. They are anticipating, I think they've already hired these individuals, but they need 3 additional mediation certified licensed attorney, senior ALJs in order to handle the caseload that comes with these. And what these cases are is these are individualized education plans per the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So when an individual has either a disability or a special need for their education plan, to the extent there's an appeal and a decision made by the local school for that, those go to an independent hearing officer. And so OALP is going to handle this. What we're asking for with the $491,000 is really just bridge funding, because in the bill, it actually requires the cost to be identified, and this is an estimated cost, the cost to be identified by July 1, 2025, and then a fee to be applied based on ADM to the schools. And so we're anticipating next biennium, there will be a one-for-one offset in revenue from schools to essentially afford the general fund impact that this is going to have on OALP. So in total, I think this is a good thing for schools, absolutely. We can make a more cost-effective approach to these hearings with 3 individuals full-time at the state versus each school having to go and identify a contractor independently for these services. And then in the future, like I said, there'll be an offsetting revenue to this, but this just gets them through the remainder of this fiscal year, and then we'll have hopefully this incorporated into their budget and then an offsetting revenue. So if there's any questions on that, I'll be free to take those, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Chair. Yes, sir. Senator Garton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, thank you. On its face, I think I support this. I just have a couple clarifying questions. I want to make sure I understand a few things. So one, and you hit on this, but I just want to clarify the point. The schools are paying for this now.
They are.
And they'll reimburse the state for these monies, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I guess a couple questions. One, I thought I heard you say that all schools, but the way I understood it is it was only schools with current cases.
So now it's only schools with current cases are paying for the independent contractors that do this hearing work. In the future, I think what the legislation implies is that there's some fee based on ADM that gets applied across. I assume it would be applied across the board if it is based on ADM. So it's going to spread the entire 400-some thousand across all students, all schools. Yeah.
Okay. And then any sense for the timing of the repayment and what that looks like?
I don't exactly know, Senator. We can't do this until July 1, 2025, so this is definitely a next biennium, next fiscal year thing. I would anticipate there's got to be a rule promulgation process that will need to go into place too in anticipation of that July 1 date. So this is probably this is absolutely a next fiscal year thing.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further questions? Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have Family and Social Services Agency. If they would come forward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Cora Steinmetz, Medicaid Director. We have 7 state plan amendments or Medicaid waiver changes that we're bringing before you today. Many of these are renewals of existing authorities. The first item is our Justice-Involved Juvenile Attestation State Plan Amendment, or SPA. At the end of 2023, federal legislation passed which requires states to provide targeted case management and EPSDT screening services for juveniles who are involved in justice settings 30 days pre and post-release. This state plan amendment is simply an attestation of the state's awareness of this requirement and an operational plan that we will submit to our federal partners at CMS that outlines how we will go about implementing this particular requirement. So there is no programmatic changes or fiscal impact associated with this attestation SPA. In the future, there will be a fiscal impact associated with the federal compliance required here, but any SPA or waiver changes that are used to facilitate coverage of these services will come back before this committee. This SPA is required to be attested to by January 1st of 2025.
Thank you. Any questions? Continue on, please.
The second item is a continuation of our HIP equalization work. This state plan amendment ensures the state's compliance with the federal requirement that we equalize reimbursement rates across managed care programs. Historically, the HIP program has carried a higher level of reimbursement than our other managed care programs in Hoosier Care Connect and Hoosier HealthWise, and now the Pathways program. The remaining facility reimbursement types that still are not equalized, but we plan to equalize as of January 1st, 2025, include rehabilitation hospitals, long-term acute care hospitals, ambulatory surgical centers, rehabilitation facilities, outpatient mental health clinics, and end-stage renal disease clinics, as well as out-of-state hospitals, which account for about 50% of the expenditures in this particular set of services. These changes are being implemented in a budget-neutral manner. You'll see there's a slight variation there just as we equalize across the different facility types, but it's intended to be as budget-neutral as possible between the managed care programs and is effective January 1st, 2025.
Thank you. Any questions? Can you please?
The third item is a state plan amendment that is a set of changes to our nursing facility reimbursement. Nursing facilities are reimbursed on a cost-based model in Indiana Medicaid. Most of these changes are what I would consider technical in nature, including indexing to different per patient day costs, statewide prices, placing an allowable cost limit on patient-related transportation expenses, indexing the average historical cost of property of the median patient bed, and aligning dates for cost report submissions after a change of ownership in a nursing facility. This methodology change has been developed in collaboration with the Indiana Healthcare Association representatives and nursing facility providers. It is also budget neutral and has a planned effective date of July 1st, 2025. The goal is to continue to make the reimbursement as equitable and transparent as possible.
Thank you. Any questions? Continue, please.
Item number 4 is a renewal of a Hoosier Care Connect waiver. You'll recall the Hoosier Care Connect program is our managed care program for individuals who are eligible for Medicaid on the basis of age, blindness, or disability and are under 60 years old. This program also serves as the Medicaid delivery model for our foster children or former foster youth, as well as our MedWorks members. This particular waiver is a 1915B waiver, which allows us to operate this program in a managed care delivery system. This is an existing waiver that we have. There are no programmatic or fiscal changes being provided. It is simply the expiration of the 5-year waiver, and we are seeking an additional 5-year renewal from CMS to become effective April 1st, 2025.
Thank you. Any questions? Can you please?
Similarly, item number 5 is an extension of a waiver from CMS. This is an 1115 waiver for our substance use disorder and serious mental illness, or SUD and SMI 1115 waiver. 1115 waivers allow states to operate innovative demonstration programs. This is particularly important in Indiana for this particular waiver because this allows individuals ages 19 to 64 to seek treatment in quality locations that are typically federally excluded from Medicaid reimbursement in the form of institutions for mental disease or IMD. These waivers, we will be seeking a 5-year renewal. There are no programmatic changes or fiscal impact. We have had to complete evaluations that will be submitted to CMS along with these waiver renewals, and we're very pleased with the initial outcomes that we're seeing, including decreasing amounts of emergency department utilization for substance use disorder and increased amounts of outpatient mental health treatment.
Any questions? Thank you. Continue on, please.
Item number 6 is similarly an extension of an existing CMS waiver authority that we have. This is in regard to our IDD waivers, the Community Integration and Habilitation, or CIH, and Family Supports Waiver, or FSW. This waiver is also a 1915B4 waiver, which allows, with these two IDD waivers, a selective contracting authority. Through this, we have a single case management set of providers that offer case management services to our intellectual and developmental disability population. This is another waiver that we are seeking to be renewed for an additional 5 years to become effective July 1st, 2025. The purpose of this waiver is to allow for the highest quality case management for these at-risk individuals.
Thank you. Questions? Continue, please.
The final item that we are bringing are a set of waiver amendments for our remaining home and community-based services waivers. This includes the Pathways for Aging waiver, the Health and Wellness waiver, and the Traumatic Brain Injury waivers. The primary piece of this waiver amendment is to transition to an LCAR model, which stands for Level of Care Assessment Representative. You'll recall that in addition to financial eligibility, waiver members must qualify on the basis of functional eligibility, meaning that they meet nursing facility level of care. By transitioning to an LCAR model, we will be able to ensure standardization of that nursing facility level of care functional eligibility assessment and have oversight of a single contracted entity. The other piece of the waiver amendments that we are bringing is the addition of reserved capacity on our Pathways for Aging and Health and Wellness waivers for individuals who reside in assisted living and who have spent down their financial resources and need waiver support to continue residing in that assisted living facility. Both of these changes are being proposed in a budget-neutral manner to begin July 1st, 2025.
Thank you. Any questions? Hearing none. Thank you for
Thank you very much.
presentation. Well, I believe now committee members are at that time where it's you look at officially adopting an agenda. Are there any motions, or is there a motion to remove any item from the proposed agenda? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to formally adopt the proposed agenda.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the proposed motion to formally adopt the proposed agenda? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Is there anything else that needs to come before the committee at this point? I do want to thank, again, the Indiana University Southeast for being our host and being great hosts, and we greatly appreciate that. And last but definitely not least, Representative Cherry, thank you for your service over the years. It's been 10 years now. We definitely appreciate that. Court had a ceremony last night, and we all wish you the best. And again, thank you for serving our state in such a wonderful way, and personally helping me in my position. So with that, thank you, and we stand adjourned.
Bob Cherry.